Thank you so much. I am grateful to God for this opportunity to be in this place. I'm grateful to be in Kentucky. It snowed in New Jersey this morning, so if for no other reason, you helped me escape our third snowstorm. To your great governor, let's give the governor and the First Lady a round of applause. I just admire the governor. I thought we agreed on most things till I found out he had 9 children. I have twin sons, and I named them Alpha and Omega. So you're the beginning and you're the end. But what a great vision, what a great passion. I have spent time with numerous governors and in response to many of their requests, but never in this country have I met a governor and First Lady who have such a passion for the children who need us most. Thank you so much, First Lady and Governor Bevin. To Chief Justice Minton, I didn't tell him this, but now I can say it because the cameras are on. I've not always felt this comfortable in a courthouse. You know, first part of my years, I had some encounters that resulted in passing through the corridors of justice, and I was on the wrong side. And so thank God for personal transformation. And I feel right at home with the Chief Justice. Thank you for your hospitality. And to Secretary Glisson, when we had our conference call last week, I felt like she was exceeding her governmental authority, and she was trampling on ecclesiastical territory. Now I know why. She is a preacher, and a good preacher at that. Commissioner Johnson is a rare public servant, and she has proven that you can be inside a bureaucracy, but the bureaucracy not be inside you. And she is just a dynamic advocate and leader for the children of this state. To my colleagues in the ministry, I see Pastor Palmer over there, who's a great leader, and to Reverend Smizer and Chipwood, thank you for your great prayer, and Reverend Smith. I am, any members of the legislature, members of the cabinet, I'm honored to be here. When my sons were very young, probably 3rd or 4th grade, our doorbell rang in the middle of an afternoon, and when I opened the door, it was a police officer. And the police officer, upon seeing me, said, "Is everything all right in this house?" And I said, everything is fine. Why do you ask? And he said, "Because someone from this address dialed 911. And I said, "Well, I can't imagine who dialed 911. I didn't dial 911. I called my wife. She said, I didn't dial 911. And my younger twin, hearing the conversation, said, "Oh, I dialed 911. I said, "You dialed 911? Why did you dial 911? He said, "Well, in school yesterday, our teacher said if you ever need help, dial 911. And Mom told me to make up my bed and clean up my room." And I needed some help. So I dialed 911. I said, "You're going to need more help than that." And I assured the officer that everything was all right, and shut the door and made sure I locked up the phone so he couldn't reach it. But at an early age, our children, like all of us, learn that there are some things that require help from the government. There are some government responsibilities that we need to access, and we need, therefore, strong leadership, and we need effective government, and we need to understand that without government on a local and county and state and federal level that really works for people, then the quality of our lives will not be what it could be and what it should be. But there comes a point in our lives when each of us recognizes that the most effective government cannot solve the most critical challenges that we have. And when I served in public office and traveled to other countries describing America, to Belgium, I was lecturing in the embassy in South Africa, speaking to young people in Israel, speaking to a think tank that was thinking through the future of Israeli government. I never failed to mention the fact that to be like America, or to understand America, requires deeper thought than simply the execution of free and fair elections or the construction of a free enterprise system and watching the Dow Industrial Average go above 20,000. To understand America is to understand that beyond the exercise of government and the authority of the public sector is civil society, where churches and mosques and synagogues and community organizations and caring people make this country what it is. You take away the volunteers in the court system. You take away the directors of hospitals and universities. You take away people who are willing to care and nurture children who are not their biological products. And this country falls on its face immediately. And so this is not rocket science, and it's not unique that to be America, we must engage in the construction and the reconstruction of a common consensus that we are, in fact, our brothers and our sisters' keepers. And this foster care system has proven to be not only complicated, but frightening. Because often the victims become the criminals, and the caregivers become the targets. And what we have left is a social morass of failure and destruction. And so I am absolutely, profoundly moved by the passion coming from the top. For while government cannot solve all of the problems, government does require leadership that's passionate, that's integral, that's flat-footed. And I never thought Kentucky would be the place. But I'm hearing from the governor and first lady and their team of leaders, partnering with legislative leaders and judiciary, I'm hearing today an announcement that Kentucky will not only be known for horses and basketball, but now Kentucky will lead the nation in taking care of the needs of the most vulnerable children that we have. Give yourself a round of applause. Yeah. So we're really talking about three things. One is bringing to a level of awareness challenges that many people just don't know exist. Life is complicated. You don't have to be in foster care to have a complicated life. Try to raise twins and get them out of your house by the time they're 30. That's complicated. Try to deal with the shift in technology. That's complicated. Life is complicated. And sometimes life is so complicated, we don't look up above the rim of our own complications into the larger complications of society. So it's not that we're bad people, it's not that we're mean people. We give money away, we support institutions, we rescue not only children from other nations, we rescue entire nations. There are girls going to school in Afghanistan because of us. There are children in Africa eating because of us. Blindness caused by disease among people who live near rivers in Africa is being cured because of us. We have leveraged our power and our resources more effectively than any country ever to exist in any part of the world at any time in history. We're not a mean people, but we just don't know. When the governor of New Jersey came to my church and said, "We need your help in foster care," I had already earned 3 degrees. I had awards from various organizations. Our church was what you might call a successful church. I just didn't know. I didn't know the kind of data that was revealed to you today. I didn't know that children in foster care were prime targets for human traffickers. I didn't know that the foster care system was a pipeline to the prison system, and that more likely than not, children coming out of foster care would end up on drugs or in jail. I just didn't know. I wasn't dumb, but I was ignorant to this issue, and that's why it takes this level of attention being brought to this type of problem, because many people just don't know. They don't know how hard it is to be a foster parent. I didn't know that in New Jersey we were losing more foster parents every year than we were signing up. We had a negative retention rate in large measure because it was so tough to be a foster parent, because the social workers and the caseworkers were so overworked, they couldn't provide the support that foster parents needed. I didn't know that it was hard to get the medical records of a foster child. I didn't know that sometimes you could not terminate parental rights for a child even if the parent was serving a life sentence in jail. I didn't know. And the way we were able to move from a segregated society to an integrated society in large measure because the nation was able to see on national television the pain and trauma of the civil rights movement. And when the public began to know the devastating effects and the embarrassing realities of segregation, that's when America stood up and said, we're going to change. We've got to bring as much focus on a national level to the problem that happens in every state, to the children in foster care, as we did blacks locked up in civil rights segregation. So in our state, when the governor came to me and said, we need your help in foster care, and at that time we had our only female governor, I said to her, well, Governor, what do you need? And she said, well, our biggest problem is this. We have 57 children that are border babies in our state. If I didn't know about foster care, I certainly didn't know about border babies. The border baby in New Jersey at that time was the SNAP child in Kentucky at this time. I never knew SNAP meant children. I thought SNAP was new stock that you bought on the stock exchange. I didn't know SNAP. 57 children. When the governor said to me, border babies, I thought to myself, what is a border baby? I thought a border baby was a baby maybe brought over the border. I didn't know what a border baby was. And she said, well, here's what's happening. These young people in our urban centers are having children. They've registered in the hospital under a false name. They sneak out, Reverend, in the middle of the night, and the child is stuck there in the hospital, boarding in the hospital. The state has a statutory obligation to remove the child from the hospital within a certain amount of time and put them in a caring, loving home, because the longer the child stays in a sterile environment, although it's clean, it contributes to the likelihood of their developing psychological and emotional defects over time. And so in the meantime, they just get volunteers to come and touch the child. And the state was taking too long to remove the children from the hospitals because, like in Kentucky and New Jersey, we had a paucity of families that were willing to do that work. And my first response was, these children are not in the neighborhood of my congregation, and so let's find some people that can help. And she said, we tried that, and you're my last choice. You're my last option. I've called everybody I know. And I said, how many children? She said, 57. I'll get you 57 families. And in 6 weeks, we had 85 families. They were all trained and licensed. We took all the children out of the hospital. We fixed the border baby problem in 2 months. I called the governor and said, I've done what you asked me to do. Now, 19 years later, we've trained and licensed 465 families to be foster families. We've placed 1,444 children into those homes, and we've adopted 300. So much for my 2-month project. But it all started with awareness. You can't fix what you don't know exists. Then it also meant we had to accept responsibility. I have a growing congregation, and if you have a growing congregation, there's work to do all the time. Before I had a growing congregation, I had a non-growing congregation, and when you have a non-growing congregation, there's work to do all the time. And there's enough work to do within the confines of the structure to not look for extra work. But as the governor, who was the state, came to the preacher, which was the church, and as all of the voices and the noise is being made around the separation of church and state, I had to be reminded from my Baptist heritage that the separation of church and state was not designed to protect the state from the church. It was designed to protect the church from the state. Which meant that the church had a responsibility to help the church, the state be the state. We pay no property taxes, but we have police protection. And we pay no property taxes because built into the legal infrastructure of our country in every state in America is this assumption that a church, just a physical church structure, is an inherently beneficial use of land. That's policy. Well, if a church is inherently beneficial, then the church has to be inherently beneficial to more than just itself. There ought to be value that is reciprocal as a church benefits from living in a country and functioning in a nation that protects the freedom of worship. That's a benefit. Then the community and the state and the nation should benefit by the worship of a people who claim to believe in a God that has given us both power and responsibility. And so as I began thinking about our role and whether or not this was the right fit, I had to think about the fundamentals of all great religions. When you look at Judeo-Christian heritage and even add the global billion-person Islamic tradition to it, you realize that this is supposed to be who we are. Moses had a foster mother. Pharaoh's daughter saw the basket and said, he's not mine, but I claim him. And then God arranged for Moses' mother to work for his foster mother and got his biological milk from his own mother, even though she was working for his foster mother. Esther had an uncle named Mordecai, but Mordecai functioned as Esther's foster dad, and Esther would have never gone to see the king unless her foster dad, Uncle Mordecai, had said, maybe you've been called to the kingdom for such a time as this. Ruth wouldn't have had any place in the biblical text had it not been for Naomi. And when Ruth's husband died, Naomi said, come on with me. Abraham and Lot, walk with me through the Hebrew Bible, and you'll find this model of people raising children and young people who were not their biological parents. Muhammad adopted a child. And when Muhammad's adopted child grew up and had a wife and then had a divorce, Muhammad, the Islamic prophet, actually released his adopted son to take back his biological name. Jesus had a foster father. You don't think Joseph had much to do with Jesus, do you? But the angel told Joseph, even though your girlfriend is not pregnant with your baby, you raise him like your own. And so when Jesus was 12, hung around in Jerusalem, Joseph showed up and reprimanded Jesus as his foster dad, and then Jesus said, but I'm working for my real father. My point is, religion has to do more than cause the religious to celebrate themselves. But religion should spur us to care about the orphans and the widows and the least of God's children. And so we had to accept responsibility as a congregation to be for these children what our Creator had called us to be. But you can be aware and you can accept the responsibility and still not know what to do. And what I've promised Governor Bevin and the Commissioner is that the 19 years of practical experience in recruiting people to be foster parents, in providing support to those who had signed up, in having respite care available, in buying those cribs that weren't in the state's budget, and getting backpacks for children so they'd feel normal, in celebrating in community. One of our achievements over the years was this: while New Jersey had a negative retention rate for foster parents, we had an 85% retention rate because we implemented a program called Care for the Caring. So of the 3,500 families for which I'm responsible, when the mortgage crisis hit, we did loss mitigation and housing counseling for our foster parents first. When the mental health community offers resources to the neighborhood, we offer mental health resources to the foster parents first. You see, if one foster parent has a bad experience with separation anxiety, they have 3 friends that know that they're going through that. Those 3 people are no longer eligible for recruitment because they don't want to go through what their friend went through. We celebrate all of the foster children's birthdays in community. We integrate the foster children into Sunday school and choir and field trips and junior ushers. We embed foster care in the ministry of the church. You can't join First Baptist without being invited to be a foster parent. Come to Jesus, register to vote, and be a foster parent. Those are the 3 things. And what we want, President, we want, you give me 100 Baptist churches. We'll get those 385 children. Because this cannot be a special project that we do when we have time. Like we have to change the foster care system, we've got to change the culture of people who sing praises to God on Monday and won't lend a hand to help anybody on Tuesday. We have to change the culture of the church. This is not extracurricular. This is not a fancy fad. This is fundamental to who we are. How can we say we are a nation that has on its money, in God we trust, yet we can adopt a child from Russia before we can adopt a child from Louisville? We have to know how to do it, and what I've promised the governor, at no expense to the state of Kentucky, we're going to bring all of our experience, all of our team, all of our capacity, all of what we know how to do, because we know how to do this. We know how to convince people to come to church on Sunday morning and be as committed to foster care ministry as the choir is to singing and as the ushers are to ushering. We have to embed it in the body and the fabric of the ministry to get the outcomes that this state needs a partner to produce. And so I'm thrilled to have met Governor Bevin. I've met other governors who said to me what he said before I met him. But I can tell you without fear of successful contradiction, this team under this leadership has done more, has organized more effectively, has taken this to a high level of priority than any governor in the United States of America, including my own. See, my governor's become famous for some things, but not this. what I'm telling you is that the future of this state depends upon our willingness to take this on as our responsibility. I was giving up at one point in my early ministry, First Lady, and it was just too hard to help people, too hard to convince people to help people, too hard to speak to people like social workers who work just as hard as people in the private sector, but they make no stock options. They don't make overtime. Sometimes the social workers in our team, they got to buy their own tissues so that when they meet with the clients, they can give them tissues because of their tears. These are people who sometimes spend their own money keeping the receipts, knowing they'll never be reimbursed. These are the angels of the public sector bridging the gap between survival and total collapse. And I said, I can't spend all of my life doing this kind of work. I've got to go somewhere, make some money, get some stock so I can retire. Like social workers, young preachers working in the church, or young community activists working in the nonprofit sector, no retirement. I didn't know what a 401k was till I was 35. Didn't have one, but at least I knew what it was. and I heard a story from another young preacher that changed my life, because he helped me understand how to measure success in this space. You won't change the whole country overnight. You won't touch every life in a week. But this young preacher said to me that there was a valley. And in that valley, there were people who were physically challenged because there was a genetic problem that caused their arms to be stunted. And so everybody in this valley had short arms. And they were in the valley because the government had provided for them food and vegetables and all kinds of environmental conditions that would mitigate the challenge of their genetic problem. And a missionary took a man through this valley, and it was quite distressing, because while the environment was good, the people were literally dying on their feet. They were drawn, they were weak, and the tourist said to the guide, why would these people be in such bad physical condition when their environment has provided everything they need? And the guide said, well, the tragedy is that these people, because they have short arms, when they use the long spoons that the government has provided to feed themselves, they pick up the food and they keep missing their mouths, and they just can't survive. And on the way out of the valley, there was a second group of people, same valley, same conditions, but these people were healthy and vibrant and strong. They smiled, they sang, and the tourist said to the guide, I don't understand. This second group has the exact same circumstances and conditions and challenge of the first group, but these people are all right. And the young preacher said in this story that the guide said to the tourist, I want you to see that. He said the second group realized that if they did like the first group, they would miss their mouths with their long spoons and their short arms, and they would die from malnutrition. But they woke up one day and realized if they reach out with their short arms and their long spoons, and when they pick up their food, instead of feeding themselves, they would just reach out and feed each other. That they all could survive their handicap and rise above their conditions and use what they had to get what they needed. What we have to do in Kentucky to lead this nation is to prove that black, white, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, Jewish, Muslim, urban, suburban, rich, poor, we have to be like that second group of people. If we're going to lead the nation, it will be because, despite our handicaps and despite our differences, that the grace of God has given us the humility and the passion to reach out and feed each other and rise above and solve this problem. God bless you.